Have you ever thought about how strange it is that a voice can travel? Not just through a room, not just down a hallway, but through a wire, across a city, over hills and rivers and fields, arriving at someone's ear as clearly as if the person speaking was standing right beside you. A voice that began somewhere else entirely, vibrating through the air, somehow finding its way to you. It is quite a remarkable thing when you stop and think about it. Most of us never do stop to think about it. We just pick up a phone and talk. And the voice arrives. And we don't wonder even slightly how it happens. We just accept it, the way we accept the sun coming up in the morning or water running cold from a tap. But once upon a time, not so very long ago really, nobody could do that at all. There was no telephone. There was no such thing. If you wanted to talk to someone who lived on the other side of a city, you had to walk there or ride there or send a message and wait. And if they lived even further away, in another town, another country, well, then you might write them a letter and wait many days or even weeks for a reply. You could imagine, maybe, all the things you might want to tell them, all the questions you might want to ask. But you'd have to wait. And wait. And wait. It must have made the world feel very large and very quiet. Now, let's drift back to that quieter time and think about the man who changed all of it. His name was Alexander Graham Bell, and he was born in a city called Edinburgh, in Scotland, in the year 1847. The city of Edinburgh is old and grand and a little misty, built on hills of grey stone, full of steep cobbled streets and tall stone houses that seem to lean slightly toward each other as though they are sharing secrets. Alexander, or Alec as his family called him, grew up in a house full of voices. His father, Melville Bell, was a man fascinated by sound. Not just the way most people are interested in music or birdsong, but deeply, scientifically fascinated by the mechanics of how sound works, how the human mouth and throat and tongue shape air into the extraordinary thing we call speech. Melville Bell spent years studying exactly how each sound is made, and he came up with something quite wonderful. A system of symbols called visible speech. Each symbol showed where to put your tongue, how to shape your lips, how to position your throat to produce a particular sound. Any sound. Any sound. Any sound from any language in the world. It was an extraordinary invention, and it had a very particular purpose. Melville Bell wanted to help people who were deaf learn to speak. If they could see, in a symbol, exactly how a sound was physically made, then perhaps they could learn to make it themselves, even without being able to hear it. Can you imagine that? Learning to speak a word by looking at a picture that shows you where to put your tongue. not hearing it at all, just following the map of the sound. Young Alec grew up watching his father do this. He grew up understanding that sound was not magic, but mechanics, that it was air moving in particular ways, that voices were physical things, that the human throat was a kind of instrument. His mother was deaf, or nearly so. She had very little hearing and communicated partly through a special tube held close to the ear. And Alec, as a small boy, discovered that if he pressed his lips gently to her forehead and spoke in a low, steady rumble, the vibrations of his voice would travel through bone, and she could feel them, sense them, almost hear them. He learned very young that sound was not just something you heard with your ears. Sound was a vibration. Sound moved through things. He filed that away, the way curious children always file away the things that fascinate them, without quite knowing why, without knowing yet that the thing they have noticed will matter enormously one day. The family eventually left Scotland. They moved first to London, where Alec's father continued his work, and then, because a doctor told them the damp British climate was not good for the family's health, 2 of Alec's brothers had already died of tuberculosis, which was a terrible lung illness. They moved to Canada, to a small town in Ontario called Brantford, on the banks of the Grand River. And Brantford was where Alec began to think seriously about electricity. Now, electricity in the 1860s was still a relatively new and surprising thing. People were just beginning to understand it. The telegraph had already been invented. That was a system of sending coded messages along a wire, using short and long pulses of electrical current to spell out letters and numbers. Samuel Morse, who invented Morse code, had made the telegraph famous a few decades before. It changed the world. You could send a message from New York to Philadelphia in seconds rather than days. Just tap, tap, tap along a wire, and the message arrived. But you still couldn't send a voice. You could send a code. But the actual sound of a person speaking, that was a different matter entirely. Alec had moved to Boston by this time to teach at a school for the deaf, using his father's visible speech system. He was good at it. He loved his students. He loved the work. But in the evenings and on weekends, in a cluttered little workshop, he kept thinking about the telegraph and whether there was a way to do something more with it. One question in particular kept tugging at him. Why could a telegraph wire only carry one message at a time? What if you could send several messages at once, each one on a slightly different musical pitch, all of them humming along the wire together, and then be sorted out at the other end? That would be like sending a whole chord of music down a single wire and then having each note peel off and go to a different place. He called this idea the harmonic telegraph. And while he was working on it, he met Thomas Watson. Thomas Watson was 20 years old, a few years younger than Alec, and he was a skilled mechanic who worked in an electrical shop in Boston. He could build things. He understood how to make wires connect, and how to tune metal reeds, and how to make all the fiddly, precise little parts that Alec's ideas required. He was patient and practical, the perfect partner for someone who was full of bright, rushing thoughts. They became a team. Alec would think, Watson would build. Alec would dream. Watson would make the dream into something you could hold in your hands. And it was in working on the harmonic telegraph that something happened. Something small, something accidental, something that changed everything. It was a warm day in June of 1875. Alec was in one room, Watson in another, the two rooms connected by a wire. They were testing the harmonic telegraph, trying to get the metal reeds to vibrate at different pitches so the messages could be sorted properly. One of Watson's metal reeds had become stuck down against the contact. It wasn't releasing the way it should. Watson plucked it to loosen it. And Alec, in the other room, heard it. He didn't just hear a click, he heard the sound of the plucked reed, a very faint, thin, twanging sound, traveling along the wire. Not a code, not a pattern of dots and dashes. The actual sound. The actual physical vibration of the metal, somehow carried by the electrical current in the wire, from Watson's room to Alec's room. He came rushing through. "Watson," he said, "what did you just do? Do that again." And Watson plucked the reed again, and Alec heard it again. He understood immediately what this meant. The vibration of the reed had disturbed the current in the wire, not by switching it on and off, the way the telegraph worked, but by making the current vary, wave up and wave down, gently, in exactly the shape of the sound. A smooth, continuous, undulating electrical current that carried the shape of the sound wave within it. Like a river that, instead of flowing flat and steady, rises and dips in ripples that perfectly match the shape of a voice. If a plucked reed could do that, could make the current carry its sound, then perhaps a human voice could too. Alec went home that evening in a state of quiet, contained excitement. He knew what he wanted to build now. Not the harmonic telegraph, something much more remarkable. A machine that would take the vibrations of a human voice, turn them into electrical ripples in a wire, carry those ripples to another place, and there turn them back into sound. Back into a voice. A speaking telegraph. or as he would eventually come to call it, a telephone. The word telephone came from two Greek words, tele, meaning far, and phone, meaning voice, a far voice, a voice from a distance. Isn't that a lovely name for a thing? He and Watson worked through the autumn and winter of 1875, building and rebuilding, testing and adjusting. The first attempts didn't work very well. The sounds that came through were thin and watery, more like a hum than a voice, more like a sound underwater than a real human tone. But with each version they built, it got a little better. Alec also knew that other inventors were thinking along similar lines. A man named Elisha Gray in Chicago was working on something similar. There was a quiet but definite urgency in the air. Not panic, not drama, but a gentle awareness that time mattered. On February 14th, 1876, a cold winter morning, Alexander Graham Bell's lawyer arrived at the patent office in Washington and filed the papers for Bell's telephone patent. It was a Valentine's Day filing, which is rather a sweet detail, though it was almost certainly a coincidence. Within hours of Bell's papers arriving, Elisha Gray's lawyer arrived with his own papers describing a very similar device. The two applications came in on the same day, perhaps within hours of each other. Alex came first. And so the patent, the official recognition that this invention was his, went to Alexander Graham Bell. History sometimes turns on very small hinges. The patent was granted on March 7, 1876. Bell was 28 years old. And 2 days after receiving the patent, on March 10th of that year, in his workshop in Boston, Alexander Graham Bell picked up his new instrument and spoke the first words ever transmitted by telephone. He was talking to Thomas Watson, who was in the next room. What he said was this: "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." And Watson heard it. He heard it clearly. Those words, spoken into a device that turned voice into electricity, traveled along a wire and arrived, as a voice, in another room. Watson burst in, excited. He could hear him. He could hear him perfectly. And Bell, perhaps feeling the weight of what had just happened, was very quiet for a moment. They had done it. Now, it is worth pausing here and thinking about what the telephone actually did, how it worked. Because it is quite a beautiful and simple idea once you understand it. Think about a drum. When you hit a drum, the skin of the drum vibrates. It moves back and forth very quickly, over and over, in a pattern that makes a particular sound. The faster it vibrates, the higher the note. The harder you hit, the louder the sound. The vibrations push against the air, and the air carries those vibrations to your ear, and the tiny bones inside your ear vibrate in response, and your brain translates those vibrations into what you experience as sound. Now imagine, instead of a drum skin, a very thin, flexible disc, a diaphragm, which is just a fancy word for a thin, vibrating sheet. When you speak into Bell's telephone, your voice makes this diaphragm vibrate. Just as your voice makes air vibrate, it makes the diaphragm vibrate in exactly the same pattern. And this diaphragm is sitting very close to an electromagnet. As the diaphragm vibrates, it changes the magnetic field around the electromagnet ever so slightly, back and forth, in the exact shape of the sound wave. And those tiny changes in the magnetic field produce tiny changes in the electrical current flowing through the wire. So the wire is now carrying, encoded in its current, the exact shape of your voice. At the other end of the wire, the same thing happens in reverse. The varying current creates a varying magnetic field in another electromagnet, which makes another diaphragm vibrate in the exact same pattern as the first one. And that diaphragm pushes on the air, and the air carries the vibrations to an ear, and the ear hears a voice, your voice, traveling down a wire, arriving in another place. It really is quite something. Sound becoming electricity, then becoming sound again, in the blink of an eye, over any distance the wire can reach. Bell. Being a man who had spent his life working with deaf students, who understood the mechanics of hearing and the physics of sound, probably understood better than anyone exactly how elegant this was. It was the ear, made of wire and metal. It was the voice set free from the body, able to travel. He thought about his mother, perhaps. The vibrations she had felt through bone rather than heard through air. And here, now, vibrations were traveling not through bone but through copper, finding their way, as sound always finds its way, around every obstacle, through every medium, to the ear that was waiting. Later that summer, Alexander Graham Bell demonstrated his telephone at the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. This was a great fair celebrating 100 years of American independence, and it was full of remarkable inventions and machines and curiosities from all over the world. Crowds came every day to gawp and marvel and shake their heads in wonder. Bell set up his telephone across a large room. Some accounts say it was a very long room, perhaps 300 feet, with one instrument at each end, and he invited people to listen. Among the visitors that day was a man named Dom Pedro, who was the Emperor of Brazil. He had met Bell before, had actually visited Bell's School for the Deaf in Boston, and he was very fond of the young inventor. Dom Pedro walked to one end of the room, picked up the receiver, and put it to his ear. Bell, at the other end of the room, spoke into his instrument. And Dom Pedro, This great bearded emperor, this dignified, important man, pulled the receiver away from his ear, held it out in front of him, and stared at it in astonishment. "My God," he said. "It talks." Which may be the very best description of the telephone ever offered by anyone. It talks. The other judges and officials at the exhibition crowded around after that, taking turns, listening. One of them was a very famous British scientist named Sir William Thomson, who later became Lord Kelvin. He was one of the great scientific minds of the age, a man who did not impress easily. He put the receiver to his ear. He listened. He took it away again, and he told anyone who would listen that what he had just heard was the most wonderful thing in America. Not the most wonderful machine at the exhibition, not the most wonderful invention of that year. The most wonderful thing in America. Those are not small words from a man like that. Now, the telephone that Bell demonstrated in 1876 was not very much like the telephone you might know today. It was large and boxy, made of wood and metal, and you held it up to your ear and mouth at the same time, which meant you had to keep very still with your head at an odd angle to use it. It didn't have a separate earpiece and mouthpiece yet. Those came later. And it had no dial, no numbers, no way of reaching any particular person. In the very beginning, before telephone exchanges existed, a telephone wire ran directly from one place to another, and you could only call the person at the other end of that specific wire. The first telephone exchange, a kind of central hub where wires from many telephones met, and an operator could connect any two of them together, opened in New Haven, Connecticut, in January of 1878. It had only 21 subscribers. 21 people with telephones, all connected through the one exchange, any of whom could speak to any other. And then the idea spread, slowly at first, and then faster. The way really good ideas tend to do. By 1880, there were about 50,000 telephones in the United States alone. By 1890, there were over 200,000. Operators. Mostly women, as it turned out, because the telephone companies discovered that their voices were clearer and more calming on the line than men's voices, sat at great switchboards, plugging cables in and out, connecting callers to each other all day long. "Number, please," they would say, and you would give the number, and they would make the connection, and somewhere a telephone would ring. The ringing telephone. What an interesting little invention in itself that was. Before there were ringers, the telephone would just sit silently and you would have no way of knowing someone was trying to reach you. Thomas Watson. Bell's loyal, practical partner. invented the electromagnetic ringer that made the telephone bell. And so, ringing? Someone calling them on the telephone became a phrase that stuck around for 150 years and more, even long after telephone bells had been replaced by electronic tones and chirps, and as things are today, any sound at all. People worried about the telephone when it first arrived. They always do worry about new things, which is a very human habit. Some people thought it was undignified to have your voice go traveling down a wire to goodness knows where. Some people thought it would be bad for business because face-to-face meetings were important and the telephone might replace them. Some people thought it was frightening that a machine could carry a voice. One newspaper, in 1876, described the telephone as a curious toy. Just a curious toy. Bell took that rather well, it seems. There were also, in those early years, people who used the telephone for music. This seems like an odd idea, but it was perfectly logical. If a voice could travel down a wire, so could music. In some cities, before radio existed, you could subscribe to a service that would pipe concerts and operas down the telephone wire into your home. You would pick up your telephone at the appointed hour and listen to a live performance happening somewhere else in the city. Thousands of miles of wire, and through it, a tenor's voice in an evening coat, singing an aria in a concert hall, arriving in your parlor as you sat in your chair. It seems almost too dreamy to be true. But it was true. Bell himself, for all the fame the telephone brought him, was sometimes a little ambivalent about it. He went on to do many other things. He worked on flying machines, on hydrofoil boats, on ways to desalinate seawater, on educational ideas for the deaf. The telephone was, in some ways, almost a side project for him. A remarkable accident that grew out of his work on the harmonic telegraph and his lifelong fascination with sound and voice. He kept a notebook. He kept many notebooks, actually, filled with ideas and observations and small sketches. The handwriting hurried and thoughtful at once. And in those notebooks, you can see the mind of a man who was never quite finished wondering about things. The telephone was just one wonder among many. He married one of his former students, a woman named Mabel Hubbard, who had become deaf as a young child after a bout of scarlet fever. She had been one of the first people Bell taught, using his father's visible speech system. And she became, by all accounts, his closest companion and his most important reader of ideas. Because Bell had a habit of thinking out loud, and Mabel, who could lip-read beautifully and knew Bell's way of speaking better than anyone, was always there to listen and respond and gently push back when an idea needed pushing. He called her Mabel, mine, in his letters, and she called him Alec. And they lived a long and apparently contented life together. He died in 1922 at the age of 75 at his estate in Nova Scotia, a place called Bean Bray, which is Gaelic for beautiful mountain. It was in the wild, quiet landscape of Cape Breton Island, green hills running down to the sea, and Bell loved it as much as any place on earth. On the night he died, the telephone operators across the whole of North America, thousands of them, at switchboards all the way from one coast to the other, went silent for a moment. A brief silence, just a minute or two. All those voices paused, all those connections held open with no one speaking through them, as a way of marking the passing of the man who had made all of it possible. It is a very gentle way to mourn someone, a silence through a telephone wire. And now, if you let your mind wander just a little further, you can follow that thread of wire. From Bell's workshop in Boston, through all those early wooden telephone boxes and hand-cranked bells and patient operators at switchboards, through the decades of thin black Bakelite handsets and rotary dials that you turned with your finger, through the curly cords that stretched from kitchen walls, through the early mobile telephones that were enormous and heavy and looked like someone had attached a handle to a brick, all the way to today. To these small, smooth, extraordinarily clever devices that most people carry in their pockets, which do not look anything like a telephone at all, but which are, in their deepest nature, exactly the same thing. A diaphragm vibrating, a voice turning into electricity, electricity turning back into a voice. Your voice leaving your body, traveling through the air or along a wire or bouncing off a tower in a field somewhere and arriving, clear as a bell, in someone else's ear. Someone who might be in the next room or the next city or on the other side of the world entirely, sitting in an entirely different kind of light at a different time of day, hearing your voice as though you were right there beside them. That is what Bell and Watson built in that small Boston workshop in the quiet evenings of 1875 and 1876. That is what the pluck of a stuck metal reed set in motion. A far voice. And somewhere in there, somewhere in all of that traveling, all of that vibrating, all of that electricity quietly doing its patient work, there is still a little of the wonder that Dom Pedro felt when he held the receiver away from his ear and stared at it. "My God," he said. "It talks. It does. It really does. And perhaps the most remarkable thing, the thing that deserves to be lingered over for just a moment longer before the story trails gently away, is that none of it destroys the magic of a voice. A voice is still just a voice." Warm, particular, unmistakably the person it belongs to. Bell spent his life listening to voices, understanding them, helping people who had lost access to them find their way back. He knew that the voice is a person. that the particular pitch and rhythm and color of the way someone speaks is them, fully present, more than any photograph or letter. And the telephone preserves that perfectly. You hear someone's voice, and you know them. Even now, even all these years and all this technology later. You hear a voice, and you know. That is what Bell gave the world, not just a way of sending messages quickly, but a way of sending the person themselves, the living sound of them, breathing and present, across any distance the wire could reach, which, as it turns out, is just about any distance at all. So the world, which once felt very large and very quiet, became a little smaller and a little less quiet, and people who were far from each other could still hear each other speak. And that is the story of the telephone, told slowly and quietly, in the hope that somewhere in there, among all the wires and vibrations and one stuck metal reed on a warm June afternoon, something made you feel the smallness of the world and the wonder of a voice traveling through it. The story drifts off now, like a sound at the very edge of hearing, growing softer, softer, softer still, until it is just the faintest hum, like a wire carrying something somewhere in the quiet dark.